In the final months of 2025, several death row prisoners across the United States are scheduled to face execution. From firing squads to nitrogen hypoxia, and from shocking family murders to crimes that haunted entire communities, these cases shed light on the chilling reality of capital punishment. Before we break down each story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest true crime deep dive. Curtis Wyndham, Florida. Curtis Wyndham's case goes back to 1992 when a violent shooting spree in Orlando left 3 people dead. Among the victims were his child's mother and her mother, 2 women who played central roles in his life. The murders were not random acts of violence, but personal and deliberate. Reports from the time describe Wyndham as armed with a handgun and filled with rage. He tracked down his victims, opening fire in cold blood, and left behind a scene that horrified the community. What made the crime especially chilling was the mix of family betrayal and brutal violence, as 2 generations of women tied to his child were executed without mercy. The killings devastated both families and shocked Florida residents. Prosecutors described Wyndham as calculating and unremorseful, pointing to the deliberate way he carried out each murder. His trial resulted in a swift conviction for first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death. Execution method. After more than 3 decades on death row, Curtis Wyndham is now scheduled to die by lethal injection on August 28, 2025. Florida has historically carried out most of its executions using this method, though inmates may sometimes choose the electric chair. Wyndham did not opt for the alternative, making lethal injection the official method of his execution. Wyndham's case has been tangled in the legal system for years. He filed multiple appeals, arguing issues ranging from ineffective counsel to challenges against Florida's death penalty procedures. Each attempt failed, and courts consistently upheld his conviction and sentence. For the families of the victims, his scheduled execution marks the end of a long wait for justice that stretched more than 3 decades. This execution also highlights Florida's aggressive use of the death penalty in recent years. By 2025, Florida has already executed more prisoners than any other state that year, and Wyndham's case is another reminder of the state's commitment to carrying out sentences. Curtis Wyndham's crimes remain a dark chapter in Orlando's history. The combination of family ties, betrayal, and calculated violence makes his case stand out among Florida's capital punishment cases, and his execution will mark the closing of a story that began more than 30 years ago. Ralph Leroy Menzies. Ralph Leroy Menzies has spent nearly 4 decades on Utah's death row for a crime that still haunts the state. In February 1986, Menzies abducted Maureen Hunsaker, a 31-year-old wife and mother, from a convenience store in Salt Lake County where she worked. He lured her under false pretenses, then drove her into the mountains of Big Cottonwood Canyon. There, in a secluded area, he brutally strangled her with a rope and left her body tied to a tree. The crime stunned Utah, both for its senseless cruelty and because Hunsaker had no prior connection to Menzies. Prosecutors described it as a calculated act of violence carried out with chilling precision. Menzies was convicted of aggravated murder and kidnapping later that same year. Jurors returned a death sentence, and since then his name has been synonymous with one of Utah's darkest capital cases. Execution method. Menzies is scheduled to be executed on September 5, 2025 by firing squad, a method rarely used in the United States and virtually unique to Utah. The firing squad involves the condemned being strapped to a chair with a target placed over the heart while a team of marksmen fires simultaneously. While Utah law allows inmates to choose between lethal injection and firing squad if their crimes were committed before 2004, Menzies did not request lethal injection, which left firing squad as the state's option. His upcoming execution is set to be the first firing squad carried out in Utah in over a decade, drawing national and international attention. At 67 years old, Menzies is one of the oldest prisoners ever to face execution in Utah. In recent years, his lawyers argue that he suffers from dementia and lacks the mental clarity to comprehend his punishment. Advocacy groups and medical professionals have pointed to his case as an example of the ethical dilemma surrounding executions of elderly or mentally ill inmates. Despite those appeals, Utah's courts and governor declined to intervene. Victims' family members, who have waited almost 40 years for closure, have emphasized the long and painful road to justice. The Menzies case now stands as one of the most controversial executions of 2025, not only because of his age and medical condition, but also because of the rare use of the firing squad. The spectacle of this method, combined with the brutality of his crime, makes his execution a defining moment in America's ongoing debate over capital punishment. David Joseph Pittman, Florida. The case of David Joseph Pittman stretches back more than 3 decades to a horrific crime in Polk County, Florida, in 1990. Pittman was convicted of the double murder of 2 people inside a Lakeland home. The killings were tied to a robbery that ended in violence and arson. According to court records, Pittman broke into the home intending to steal, but the crime escalated into a brutal attack that left the victims dead. To cover his tracks, he set the house on fire, adding an even more chilling layer to the tragedy. Prosecutors argued that Pittman's actions were deliberate and merciless. The combination of robbery, murder, and arson made the crime one of the most shocking in the county's history at the time. His conviction for first-degree murder and arson led to a death sentence in the early 1990s. Execution method. After decades of legal battles, David Joseph Pittman is scheduled to be executed on September 17, 2025, by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Rayford. This is the standard method of execution in Florida, unless a prisoner opts for the electric chair, which Pittman did not. The procedure involves administering a series of drugs designed to sedate, paralyze, and stop the heart. Pittman's path through the legal system has been long and complex. Over the years, he filed numerous appeals challenging both his conviction and his sentence. His legal team raised issues ranging from jury instructions to claims of ineffective counsel. However, appellate courts consistently upheld the verdict and sentence. For the families of the victims, his execution represents the end of a wait that has lasted more than 30 years. Florida's aggressive use of the death penalty in recent years has brought Pittman's case back into focus as the state continues to schedule and carry out executions at a pace unmatched by most other states. Pittman's story is a stark reminder of how long the capital punishment process can last in the United States, from crime to conviction to the final execution date. His scheduled death by lethal injection closes a chapter that began with one of Polk County's darkest crimes back in 1990. Jeffrey T. West, Alabama. In 1997, Jeffrey T. West committed a crime that shocked a small Alabama community. West walked into a convenience store and carried out an execution-style murder of clerk Margaret Parrish Berry. Prosecutors said the motive was robbery. He killed Berry for just $250 in cash. The senselessness of the crime made it especially disturbing. Berry, described by her family as a kind, hardworking woman, never had a chance to defend herself. The case moved quickly through the courts. The brutality of the killing, combined with its trivial motive, convinced the jury to sentence West to death. For Berry's family, the crime left an enduring scar, and for decades they have lived with the memory of a loved one taken in such a callous way. Execution method. West is scheduled to be executed on September 25, 2025, by nitrogen hypoxia, a method that involves placing a mask over the inmate's face and replacing breathable air with pure nitrogen, leading to suffocation. This technique causes oxygen deprivation until death occurs. Alabama has become the first state to adopt and carry out executions using nitrogen gas. It is promoted by some officials as a more humane alternative to lethal injection, though critics strongly disagree. Opponents argue it is experimental, untested, and potentially cruel. West's case will therefore not only be remembered for his crime, but also for its place in the history of execution methods. West's execution is being closely watched across the nation and even internationally. His case follows Alabama's controversial 2024 nitrogen hypoxia executions, which already drew heavy scrutiny for possible suffering during the process. By choosing this method for West, Alabama signals its intent to continue using nitrogen gas despite backlash. At 49 years old, West has spent nearly half his life on death row. Over the years, his appeals have been denied, and courts have repeatedly upheld his conviction and death sentence. For the family of Margaret Parrish Berry, this execution is framed as long-awaited justice. For critics of capital punishment, it raises new alarms about the evolving ways states carry out death sentences. West's death will likely go down as one of the most notable executions of 2025, not only because of the crime he committed, but because it tests the boundaries of what execution methods America is willing to use. Blaine Milam, Texas. The case of Blaine Milam is one of the most disturbing in Texas death row history. In 2008, Milam was convicted for the brutal killing of his girlfriend's 13-month-old daughter, Amora Carson, in Rusk County. Prosecutors said the child was beaten to death during what Milam and his girlfriend, Jessica Carson, described as an exorcism meant to rid the baby of supposed demons. The details of the crime are harrowing. Investigators found that the infant suffered extensive injuries, with prosecutors arguing that she endured a prolonged and violent assault before her death. During the trial, the state painted a picture of Milam as the ringleader of a twisted ritual, claiming he manipulated Carson into believing that her child was possessed. The jury swiftly convicted him of capital murder and sentenced him to death. Execution method. After years of appeals, Blaine Milam is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on September 25, 2025, at the Huntsville Unit, Texas' primary execution facility. Texas has carried out more executions than any other state since the reinstatement of the death penalty, and lethal injection remains its standard method. Milam's case has been tied up in appeals for years. His defense team argued he suffered from intellectual disabilities and should not be executed under U.SA. Supreme Court rulings that bar capital punishment for those with significant cognitive impairments. These claims stalled his execution date multiple times. In 2021, his attorneys pushed for a new trial based on questions about forensic evidence and his mental health, but Texas courts rejected the appeals. Despite his legal battles, the courts consistently upheld both his conviction and sentence. What makes his case infamous is the bizarre and shocking exorcism defense, which horrified the public and drew national media attention. Even after more than a decade, Milam's crime remains one of the most unsettling capital murder cases in Texas history. With his execution scheduled, Milam's story closes one of the state's darkest chapters, a crime so brutal and bizarre that it continues to be remembered long after the trial ended. Roy Lee Ward, Indiana. In July 2001, Roy Lee Ward committed a crime that deeply shocked the state of Indiana. He entered the home of 15-year-old Stacy Payne in Tell City, had an affair with her, and killed her. The case quickly drew national attention because of both the young age of the victim and the disturbing circumstances. Ward was arrested the same day and later confessed to the crime. A jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. Execution method. Ward is scheduled for execution by lethal injection on October 10, 2025, at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City. Lethal injection has been the state's standard method of execution for decades. If carried out, it would be Indiana's first execution in several years. Ward's case has been delayed many times over the past 2 decades due to appeals and resentencing hearings. His attorneys raised constitutional challenges and procedural concerns, and courts reviewed the case multiple times. Each time, the conviction was upheld, and the death sentence ultimately remained in place. For the family of Stacy Payne, these repeated delays have meant years of waiting for the case to be resolved. Now, in 2025, the state has set a tentative execution date, signaling its intent to finally move forward. Ward's case is remembered in Indiana not only for the crime itself, but also for the long legal process that followed. After more than 20 years of litigation, the scheduled execution highlights the slow and often complicated path of capital punishment cases in the United States. Lance C. Shockley, Missouri. The case of Lance C. Shockley is one of Missouri's most infamous capital cases. In 2005, Shockley murdered Missouri State Highway Patrol Sergeant Dwayne Graham near the officer's home in Van Buren. At the time, Graham was preparing to testify in a criminal case involving Shockley, and prosecutors argued that the killing was a calculated attempt to silence him. The murder of a law enforcement officer struck the state hard. Graham was widely respected, and his death was seen not only as a personal tragedy, but also as a direct attack on the justice system itself. The crime highlighted the risks faced by officers who dedicate their lives to upholding the law, and the community rallied around Graham's family in the aftermath. Shockley was convicted of first-degree murder, with the jury unanimously sentencing him to death. Execution method. Shockley is scheduled to be executed on October 14, 2025, by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri. This facility has been the site of all recent executions in the state, and lethal injection remains Missouri's only authorized method. Because the crime targeted a law enforcement officer, the case has been viewed as especially high profile. Prosecutors emphasize the premeditated nature of the killing, linking it directly to Shockley's effort to prevent Senator Graham from testifying against him. For nearly 2 decades, Shockley's appeals have moved through state and federal courts, but the conviction and sentence have been upheld. His scheduled execution is seen by many in Missouri as the closing of one of the state's most significant capital cases. The execution of Lance C. Shockley will not only mark justice for Sonnet Graham's family, but also serve as a reminder of the dangers faced by those in law enforcement. It remains one of the most closely watched executions on Missouri's 2025 calendar. Robert Robertson, Texas. In 2002, Robert Robertson was arrested and later convicted in the death of his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki Curtis, in Palestine, Texas. Prosecutors argued that the child's injuries were consistent with shaken baby syndrome, a medical diagnosis that was widely accepted at the time. They claimed Robertson had violently shaken his daughter, causing fatal brain trauma. Robertson was sentenced to death in 2003, and his case became one of Texas's most controversial capital murder convictions. Over the years, Robertson has consistently maintained his innocence, claiming he did not harm his daughter. His defense has argued that Nikki may have suffered from undiagnosed medical conditions, such as pneumonia and possible medication side effects, that could explain her collapse and death. Execution method. Robertson is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on October 16, 2025, at the Huntsville Unit, Texas's primary execution site. Texas remains the most active death penalty state in the U.S., and lethal injection continues to be its standard method. What makes Robertson's case so significant is the scientific debate surrounding the shaken baby syndrome diagnosis. In recent years, many medical experts have questioned its reliability, noting that injuries once attributed to shaking can sometimes result from other causes, including illness or accidental trauma. Robertson's attorneys have used these evolving scientific arguments in repeated appeals, arguing that his conviction rests on outdated or flawed medical evidence. Despite these efforts, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals and federal courts have upheld his conviction and sentence. If carried out, Robertson's execution would be the first in the U.S. tied directly to a shaken baby syndrome conviction, making it a landmark case in the intersection of medical science and the death penalty. Advocacy groups, medical professionals, and legal experts are watching closely, with some warning that his execution could set a troubling precedent. Richard Kenneth Jerf, Arizona. In 1993, Richard Kenneth Jerf carried out one of the most shocking crimes in Arizona's history. Motivated by revenge after a dispute with a friend, Jerf targeted the Luna family in Glendale. He broke into their home and killed 4 family members, Albert and Patricia Luna, along with their son and daughter. Prosecutors described the murders as meticulously planned, arguing that Jerf wanted to punish the family because of his anger toward their son, who had previously been connected to a burglary of Jerf's home. The attack was labeled a revenge killing, and it left an entire community stunned by the sheer brutality of wiping out almost an entire household. Jerf was quickly arrested, tried, and convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder. In 1995, he was sentenced to death. Execution method. After more than 3 decades on death row, Jerf is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on October 17, 2025, at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence. Arizona has historically used lethal injection for all of its executions, though the state has faced controversy over its execution protocols in recent years. Jerf's crime remains one of Arizona's most infamous mass murders. His case has been tied up in appeals for decades, with his attorneys raising constitutional and procedural challenges. Despite this, courts have consistently upheld his conviction and sentence. For the families of the victims, the scheduled execution represents the end of a long, painful wait for justice. For Arizona, it marks the conclusion of one of the longest-running capital cases in its modern history. The Jerf case stands out not only because of the number of victims, but also because of the calculated motive behind the killings. Unlike crimes of passion or spontaneous violence, this was premeditated, carried out against a family who had trusted him, making the betrayal and violence even more shocking. Now, after more than 30 years of appeals and delays, Arizona is preparing to close the chapter on a crime that has haunted the state since the early 1990s. Anthony Todd Boyd, Alabama. In the early 1990s, Anthony Todd Boyd was convicted of the murder of a man during a robbery in Etowah County, Alabama. According to prosecutors, Boyd and several accomplices set out to rob their victim, but the crime escalated into lethal violence. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death after the jury concluded that the killing was intentional and committed in the course of another felony. The case gained attention not only because of the murder itself, but also because Boyd was relatively young when the crime occurred. Over the years, his legal team has fought to overturn the sentence, but courts consistently upheld both the conviction and the death penalty. Execution method. Boyd is scheduled to be executed on October 23, 2025, by nitrogen hypoxia. This controversial method involves replacing breathable oxygen with pure nitrogen, ultimately leading to suffocation. Alabama became the first state in the U.S. to carry out executions using nitrogen gas in 2024, marking a historic shift in capital punishment practices. Boyd's execution is significant because it comes at a time when Alabama is testing the boundaries of execution methods. After conducting its first nitrogen executions in 2024 and early 2025, the state announced plans to continue with the practice, despite heavy criticism from human rights organizations and medical professionals who argue that the method is untested and potentially inhumane. At the time of his scheduled execution, Boyd will have spent more than 3 decades on death row. His case has been one of many in Alabama, where the appeals process stretched on for decades before the state set a firm execution date. Harold Wayne Nichols, Tennessee. In 1988, Harold Wayne Nichols was convicted of the rape and murder of 21-year-old Karen Pulley in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Pulley was attacked in her own home, a crime that shocked the local community for its brutality and violation of safety within the home. Nichols, who had a prior record of sexual assaults, was quickly identified as a suspect. After his arrest, he was tried and sentenced to death for Pulley's murder, with the court citing both the violence of the crime and his history of similar offenses. Execution method. Nichols is scheduled to be executed on December 11, 2025. In Tennessee, death row inmates are given a choice between lethal injection and electrocution if their crime took place before 1999. If Nichols declines to choose, lethal injection is the state's default method. Both methods have faced controversy in recent years, with inmates challenging their constitutionality and arguing that they risk causing unnecessary suffering. At 64 years old, Nichols has spent more than 3 decades on death row. His legal team has filed numerous appeals, raising issues about mental health and fairness in sentencing, but courts have consistently upheld his conviction. In 2020, Tennessee's governor granted him a temporary reprieve, delaying his execution, but no permanent clemency was ever issued. Nichols' scheduled execution is especially significant because it is the last execution date of 2025, closing a year marked by an unusual variety of methods across the country, from firing squad in Utah to nitrogen hypoxia in Alabama, and the continued use of lethal injection in states like Texas and Florida. For Tennessee, his case highlights the state's dual method system and the ongoing debate over which execution procedures are considered constitutional. For many, the Nichols case is a stark reminder of how long the death penalty process can stretch, with decades passing between the crime, the conviction, and the final sentence being carried out. As the year comes to an end, Harold Wayne Nichols' lie, execution will symbolize both the persistence of capital punishment in the United States and the unresolved questions about how it is administered. From firing squads in Utah to nitrogen gas in Alabama, the final months of 2025 showcase the wide range of execution methods still used in America. Each of these cases tells a different story of violence, justice, and the long road of appeals that led to these final days. Which of these cases struck you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true crime stories and in-depth coverage of the justice system. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned, because in the world of true crime, there's always another case waiting to be told.